The all-new Team Modi has gotten straight down to business. The newly minted and promoted ministers took charge of their ministries. The Prime Minister also chaired a meeting with his revamped cabinet. While the focus of this overhaul is on increasing performance and efficiency of the government, the critical question is, will these new faces be able to re-energize and revamp the Modi sarkar's image and its ability to deliver to the last mile? Here's our lead story tonight.
First day, first show of the newly minted Mantris. Day after taking oath, an all-new Team Modi got down straight to business. The newly appointed INB and Sports Minister Anurag Singh Thakur was the first to take charge.
जो जिम्मेदारी माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी ने मुझे दी है, मैं उस पर खरा उतरने का हर संभव प्रयास करूंगा. जो विश्वास व्यक्त किया है उस पर खरा उतरने का प्रयास करूंगा.
Former IAS officer Ashwini Vaishnav took charge of crucial two ministries, Railways and Information Technology and Communications.
I thank Honorable Prime Minister for giving me this very big responsibility. Railways is a subject which is very close to Honorable Prime Minister's heart. His vision is huge and I will work hard to implement his vision. Railways is already last 7 years, lots of good work has been done and it will be my responsibility to take it forward.
With the Twitter versus Centre war already raging, the new IT minister has his task cut out. And on his debut, he had this warning for the social media giant.
भारत में रहने वाले हर व्यक्ति को, भारत में काम करने वाली हर कंपनी को, सभी को भारत के नियम मानने चाहिए.
अगर वो नहीं मानते क्योंकि आपकी तरफ से नोटिस गया है, वो मंत्रालय
पूरा इसका स्टडी करूंगा.
Kiran Rijiju, who has been promoted to a cabinet rank, took over as the new law minister.
Whatever charge comes to us, whatever responsibility is assigned, we have to discharge it with full commitment.
Mansukh Mandavia, who will be leading India's COVID fight back now, assumed office as the new health minister.
स्वास्थ्य मंत्री के रूप में प्रधानमंत्री जी की अपेक्षा के अनुसार मैं काम करने की कोशिश करूंगा.
The new Modi cabinet boasts of Nari Shakti with 11 women ministers, the highest representation since 2004. MOS External Affairs and Culture, Meenakshi Lekhi, was the first woman minister to take charge.
प्रधानमंत्री जी सशक्त महिलाओं को जिम्मेवारी देकर भारत को सशक्त करने की बात कर रहे हैं. यही पुरानी नीति और अब की नीति में अंतर है.
MOS Health Bharti Pawar, MOS Agriculture Shobha Karandlaje and MOS Commerce and Industries Anupriya Patel too hit the ground running.
एक बहुत ही अच्छा विभाग है, मेरे लिए नया विभाग है, एक लर्निंग अपॉर्चुनिटी है, बहुत कुछ सीखने का अवसर भी होगा.
The opposition, however, is unimpressed with Team Modi's new lineup. Congress MP Rahul Gandhi took a jibe at the new health minister.
For 7 years, among various unfulfilled promises of Prime Minister Modi, is the promise of the Women's Reservation Bill. He said immediately that will be passed. We passed it in the Rajya Sabha during the UPA time. That has been pending for 7 years. If the concern is so much for women, why is that bill not being passed?
The new ministers have their task cut out. A raging pandemic and a COVID-infected economy are the two big challenges that will need immediate attention.
The mid-term cabinet reshuffle saw many political heavyweights exit out. With that, expectations have mounted on the new ministers, especially amidst a raging pandemic and an economy under stress. And with the Prime Minister keeping a close watch, it is a tightrope walk for the ministers with little margin for error. With video journalist Hitesh, this is Mosmi Singh in Delhi for India Today.
So will the new Team Modi be able to infuse new energy, new vigor, new josh into the union government, and will it improve its ability to deliver politically and administratively? Will it help Team India win? That's the big question I'm asking tonight. Joining me on this broadcast, representing the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, its spokesperson Amit Malviya. With us representing the ruling Congress, the opposition Congress, is Sushmita Deb. We have Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, who studied the Prime Minister, written a book on Prime Minister Modi, understands his mind, his journey, his way of thinking. TV Mohandas Pai joins us, well-known industrialist, watcher of this government, and with me in the broadcast is India's foremost political commentator, Rajdeep Sardesai. Rajdeep, let's start with you. Do you think this government, in its new avatar, has enough new energy, new vigor to be able to deliver on the promises Prime Minister Modi made in 2019 in time for the next elections of 2024?
Let's divide that question into a couple of parts. The first obvious part is that when you bring in 43 new ministers, some who are elevated to cabinet rank, it naturally brings in an element of energy, a sense of purpose, because you're new, you're fresh, you're dying to go to work. I sense that when I met a couple of mantris today who have been other new mantris, they were all dressed up, all keen to go to work, be there at 9 a.m. in the morning. So I think it's important that after 7 years where the government has largely been very status quoist in its choice of ministers, Mr. Modi has not wanted to really be too disruptive when it comes to his ministers, not too many reshuffles. I think that makes a difference. So I think on the energy factor, no doubt, with a number of younger MPs becoming ministers, it helps. Whether that leads to delivery, efficaciousness, meeting targets, timelines, will require not just a change in appearance, but also a change in mindset, Rahul. The mindsets will have to change. You'll have to delegate, empower ministers much more. You'll have to ensure that it's not just a small core team of loyalists who are taking all the big decisions. The decisions are spread across the table. I was, to be very honest, pleased with the fact that the government seemed to have an element of ministerial accountability when people were removed and others were brought in. But I was disappointed, frankly, in some critical portfolios that perhaps require much more than just interdepartmental jugglery.
Where are you disappointed?
For example, I am unable to understand how the Ministry of Environment and Labour and Employment, you're going back to the dual charge system. I believe environment is critical for the times in which we live. Climate change is going to be a big issue. It should be a ministry that you focus upon. On the other hand, when you combine education and skill development, I think it's an excellent idea because there's a natural convergence there. So my sense is, while a lot that has been done in terms of appearances, I think is positive, in terms of the optics is very good. The representative character of the cabinet with more states, more caste groups included is politically very wise. I still wonder whether in terms of decision making and delivery, you're going to have to change some of your style of functioning, ensuring that ministerial accountability is not just once in 7 years from now, it's going to be much more regular, and you're going to get them, it's more participatory. It cannot be top down.
Put that question to Amit Malviya. Rajdeep making the point that it's not just a change of faces and a change of guard in the ministries. What's required is also a new way of functioning so that a lot of the promises the Prime Minister made get implemented in the 2.5 years your government still has before the next general elections. What gives you confidence and faith, Mr. Malviya, that this new team Modi will be able to deliver with new energy and vigor?
Well, Rahul, I heard Rajdeep say that he would like to see the ministers more empowered. So from the time of UPA, when the Prime Minister himself wasn't empowered, to now, where political analysts, however biased they might be, are talking about the ministers being empowered. So I think we've come a long way. He believes that ministers are not empowered. I think it's a fiction of his imagination. It's perhaps his blinkers that he can't see a whole range of ministers handling crucial ministries in the last 2 years have taken several decisions on their own. And the fact is that the Prime Minister has a certain vision for his government, and every ministry and every minister is aligned to it. That is how we function in a government, that
particular mandate that we sought. Now,
having put that criticism aside, let me come to what happened yesterday. There is a fair mix of people, young, old, women, experienced, people who've come with administrative experience, either in the bureaucracy or have been ministers in the past in state legislative assemblies and state governments. There are people who are fairly young and have been given opportunities. So it's a complete package. You have social representation, you have people from the SC community, ST community, the OBC, all represented. Before this, you've never had a government that has been so representative of every class of society. The skill set that is required to work governance. Therefore, you have people who will deliver. There are people who bring the message of representation, and that is what good governments do. And every government strives to strike that balance. You could agree with it, you may say it's 80% done, 85% done, and so on and so forth. But that's a matter of assessment, and it could vary. But Prime Minister Modi yesterday, by doing this cabinet expansion and reshuffle, has clearly said that this is the government that is going to fulfill the aspirations of New India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, something that our government and Prime Minister himself has elucidated, and I think we are going to work.
Okay,
and it will be borne out by the 2024 general election.
The Congress came out and criticized the cabinet. Is that just criticism for the sake of criticism? Because as the opposition party, you can't obviously say that the Prime Minister did a good job. What, on the points of substance, are your key points of critique against the new faces that have been brought in, or the portfolios in the manner in which they've been adjusted? Sushmita Dev.
Well, Rahul, let me start by wishing the new team all the very best, because they're going to need it. Let's not mince our words. What the country has seen in the last 1.5 years or so is sort of a health emergency. Not sort of, it is a health emergency. Now, in a situation like this, when the economy is a challenge, where we've seen national security has also been a challenge, the way the inflation is outside the government's control is a challenge. And the pandemic has thrown the biggest challenge this nation has seen in many decades. Now, the question is, the graver the situation, the more you expect that it is something that a Prime Minister is definitely not going to leave it to his health minister or his finance minister. You expect a Prime Minister to be far more instrumental in a serious situation like this. Now, see, as far as the Congress party is concerned, this is a government with a majority mandate, something this country has always wanted and looked forward to. But given the situation in the last 2 years since this government came to power, every policy, whether it comes to the health emergency or the economic slowdown, we've seen this government failing. Now, what I want to ask, I think pose a question here in this debate is that this is a government which is commonly known as Modi Sarkar. I mean, I don't remember anybody calling, Rajiv Sarkar or Indira Sarkar. But what I'm saying is the hopes of the people center around one personality, that is Prime Minister Modi.
But that seems to be working for the BJP. That seems to be working well for the BJP. So I don't understand what your point of criticism is.
Rahul, 1 second. It may be working for the BJP, but the question is it working for the nation? So my concern is not the BJP right now.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is, just a second, let me finish. The most important question which Rajdeep has raised is the style of function is going to matter a lot. Can they even pick their own bureaucrats to work with? Can they pick their own joint secretaries, principal secretaries, which we've seen in the past the ministers have not had the freedom to do so. So the question is, are they going to be meeting this challenge? Because frankly speaking, Prime Minister is the person who calls the shots, not his minister.
So Mohandas Pai, do you want to respond to
known to be ornamental.
Sushmita Dev? She makes the point that this is a government of the Prime Minister, by the Prime Minister. He's not giving enough autonomy, in her opinion, to his ministers to formulate policy or even to have their own choice of bureaucrats. Will this lead to better delivery? It's not just what works for the BJP, argues Sushmita Dev. She's saying it's about what works for India. Will this government deliver better for the people of India? Mohandas Pai.
Well, Rahul, my first view is, yes, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is a strong leader. Yes, he had a strong vision. Yes, he's extremely hardworking, extremely focused on getting execution. He has executed better than any prime minister in India's history over the last 7 years. The data is very clear. And he wants India to succeed. And he is the one who brought the BJP to power. People voted for him in this country the first time and the second time, despite Lutyens Delhi carrying on a campaign. So he's a very strong prime minister. It will be typical for anybody opposing him to attack him personally and make comments. And I think the comments are very welcome. And I think Rajiv Sardesai made a very, very good analysis, critical analysis of what is required. To me, the question before Prime Minister Modi and his cabinet is very clear. You know, the first 5 years, deep reforms, social changes, very good thing, but there was a lot of economic pain. We didn't get the growth that we possibly wanted to reach $5 trillion. In the second 5 years, you know, first 6-8 months, okay, then the COVID hit, and we've been through 15 months of deep pain. The economy is in pain, people have lost their jobs, and people have lost their income, consumption is down. So government has got 3 years before the next election to remedy, and having new faces with fresh energy, like Rajiv said, is very good. Now they must focus on execution, relieve the pain of the people, grow the economy maybe 9-10%, create a lot of jobs, improve the quality of life, and people make sure people get income.
No,
I think that's
sure.
very
So
critical.
all of what you're saying is good. The economy to grow at 9-10%, jobs, income. But Yogendra Yadav, is this the team that can deliver? That's the critical question. What needs to be done is known. But can this new team Modi deliver in your view, Mr. Yadav?
Rahul, in this entire debate, the assumption is that the team means ministerial team. I'm afraid that's a very bad assumption. Ministers don't matter. You see, this is like Indira Gandhi's cabinet during emergency, and it was Indira Sarkar for someone who doesn't know. Do we remember who was the home minister at that time? Do we remember who was the finance minister? Do we care? No, we don't, because it was Indira Sarkar. Similarly, this is a Modi Sarkar. There's only one minister in this cabinet, probably 1.5, perhaps 2. Others don't matter. So why are we debating something? This ministership, I would be more interested in changes in PMO, for example. That would be very important about understanding changes in policies and performance. PMO matters, ministers don't matter. Ministership is about Lal Batti. And I must say, Mr. Modi has distributed the Lal Batti very nicely across states, across caste communities. But it's about Lal Batti. Let's not get confused about governance. It has nothing to do with governance. If at all it was about governance, which is the first ministry everyone in this country thought should be addressed? Finance. It's the economy, the biggest disaster of the last couple of years. Before COVID, during COVID, after COVID, is the economy. And the entire finance ministry's team stays the way it was. So what are we looking at? What were the other major failures? Farmers, the laws that were passed, inability to address problems of the farmers, the finance minister, the agriculture minister stays. Defense, Sino-Indian border has had the biggest problem since 1962. A large chunk of our land has been captured. Where is the defense minister? Where he was. So it's not about performance. You might say that Dr. Harshvardhan went because of performance. I'm glad he went, but he was a scapegoat, poor scapegoat. And these people went not because of performance, because the problem with Dr. Harshvardhan was not that he caused the debacle, which is what everyone else was. The whole thing was being driven by PMO. The real problem is that he failed to conceal it. He failed to hide it. This entire government is about perception management. It is not about governance at all.
Okay.
So I would
let Amit Malviya respond.
I would not be expecting things that cannot happen.
Let Amit Malviya respond. One, that this is largely a government driven by the Prime Minister himself, and therefore the likes of Harshvardhan can't take responsibility for the COVID debacle. It's a larger failure, and a lot of that lies at the door of the Prime Minister himself. How do you respond to Yogendra Yadav, Amit Malviya?
Well, you know, Yogendra Yadav has been spending far too much time on Singhu and Tikri border for him to know the steps that were taken by the finance ministry, for example, in the last year, which effectively meant that India's growth trajectory started to look up before we were hit again by the second wave. He also perhaps has missed the global context of this COVID pandemic and how well India has done despite rickety healthcare infrastructure of the last 7 decades. But I don't blame him. The problem is that he has, in the last 7 years, never seen anything good in this government. He is a professional critique of this government. So I will give him his space and time under the sun and a few minutes on your program as well. But Rahul, at the end of the day, governments get elected by the people of this country. We go to the people and ask for a mandate. We did that last time after being in office for 5 years, and Mr. Modi got a handsome mandate. And in 2024, when we go to the people, we will lay out in front of them everything that we did and achieved despite a very tough 15 months so far as the COVID pandemic goes, and we don't know how long this is going to take. But the government has all the intent to make good the pain that people have had to suffer.
Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, someone who spent a lot of time trying to understand the mind of the Prime Minister, what do you think it reflects about his mindset at the moment, the changes that have been made and the changes that haven't been made, and does this provide the mid-course correction that the Prime Minister would have been hoping for?
Rahul, I'll be very brief. You know, the expansion or reshuffle, whatever we would like to call it, has come at a time when Mr. Modi needed to do something to regain the initiative which is lost over the course of the second phase of the pandemic. Let's not forget, you know, in the January, February and March this year, this government was really riding high. You know, the COVID numbers were coming down. We saw that extraordinary resolution passed by the BJP office bearers in which Mr. Modi was personally thanked for have defeated the COVID. And after that, you know, several developments also happened. The vaccination program had started and everything seems to be running quite smoothly. Then suddenly out of the blue came the second wave. I do not want to get into the debate of whether the government, you know, was caught napping, whether they did not heed the early signs, but nonetheless it happened. Now, from April onwards and May particularly were very bad months for this government. We saw also reports of Prime Minister's ratings coming down to an all-time low. I am not saying that it was coming lower than the other opposition leaders, but it was at his level, it was at the all-time low. So Mr. Modi needed to do something now that the pandemic is once again coming into some kind of a control. The figures are down. The vaccination program, he's again rejected and started it. I do not want to get into it, but he had to send a message that he's once again back in control so that he can get his, ratings up. Now, what does he do? Obviously, it becomes that you try to do an exercise to improve the image of the government. Unfortunately, this entire exercise, which has been planned for about a month and a half, started from Uttar Pradesh, which actually took the brunt. And there was this protracted tussle between Yogi Adityanath and the central leadership. I do not want to get into all that. But at the end of it, yesterday, the feeling at night was that this essentially turned out to be a political fix, something to give the fairly, tired and, confused party cadre, something to go to the people and say that out here is Mr. Modi.
Do you agree with that, Rajdeep? That it's more political with an eye on the elections rather than an attempt to reset the governance architecture?
The fact that you have so many ministers from Uttar Pradesh, so many from Maharashtra, Karnataka, Bihar, states which returned BJP with big numbers in 2019, from Bengal, caste communities that you've been wooing. Please understand, making people ministers doesn't necessarily win you elections. This is the Congress model. I sometimes say the new BJP is the old Congress. The old Congress would do this. Is caste ko represent karo to ye caste hamari taraf aa jayegi.
But it's a fact.
No, it's not. There is no proven.
Otherwise, the community says, "Hamara to kuch hai nahi. Aapne hamare liye kya kiya, sir?"
No, that is the
when you travel with leaders, that's what people from these communities say. It's a harsh reality. It may not sound like a pleasant thing to say on TV, but it's the reality of political life.
My limited point is, Rahul, that in 2019, the BJP did extremely well among OBC communities, did very well among SC/STs. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to then reward them with ministries. They've established Mr. Modi is the vote catcher. Please understand, these ministers are not the vote catchers. They are not the reason why they've...
Let me ask that question to Yogendra Yadav. Rajdeep makes the point that giving space to a particular community, whether it's a Dalit, OBC or tribal community, doesn't mean that that community looks more fondly at your government, I would argue to say that it does make a difference because they feel that ये मेरा आदमी है, चलो इन्होंने मोदी जी ने इनको मंत्री बनाया.
No, before you go to Yogendra ji, just to say that it may be seen as a political necessity, but it is an old way of looking at politics, I believe, not the new way. And when you say representative and a rainbow, remember this rainbow has only one Muslim. In this entire kaleidoscopic arrangement, all the names I was given, and good for them, but the fact is there's only one Muslim, and that is someone who's one of the few ministers left from the Vajpayee era, Mukhtar Abbas Naqvi. But this is my view, that I don't think it's just about politics.
Yogendra Yadav.
And if it is, it won't work.
I think what Rajdeep is saying is true. The only exception to what he's saying is when you have a community which has never had any important leader represented in union cabinet. For example, Matua community from West Bengal.
Sure.
Rajbangshis as well. So to that kind of community, such signals do make a difference.
Sure.
Because they have never seen a leader of theirs who's, somewhere up there in Delhi. But to others, this is a nonsensical game. It doesn't deliver very much. But as I said, Lal Battis have been distributed very nicely, and that gives some comfort. It may not matter with the voters, but it helps you do Delhi management. But this is all about Delhi management. One last thing before I stop. Someone said this. It is not my original. Someone said this beautiful thing about the expansion yesterday. He said, "Kharabi engine mein thi, aur badle dibbe ja rahe hain." That, to my mind, is the real problem. The real problem is with the engine, and you're changing coaches. How is that going to solve the problem?
Mohandas Pai, on the promise that the Prime Minister made of minimum government, maximum governance. In 2014, he started with 46 ministers. We're now up at 78. The maximum allowed is 81. Has the Prime Minister walked away from that promise? Is this taking away from the idea of minimum government?
Well, my personal view is government has expanded its ambit in the last 7 years. Many of the things government does is not necessary, but they have expanded. And obviously, this cabinet, which is larger in number compared to the first cabinet, may show the message that, the number of people having ministries are increased. But to me, Rahul, I'm very, very clear. What will people get in the next 3 years from the Narendra Modi government? People voted them to power in 2014, voted them to power in 2018 and 19. In 19, because they got a lot. The poor have never seen 5 years where they got so many things from the government to improve their lives. That is a recorded fact, despite what anybody might say. So in 2024, people of this country are going to ask, is my lot better than it was in 2019? Do I have much more money? Do my children have better education? Do I have better health? That's the question they're going to ask. So Radeep has been right. This caste equation works up to a point. That's why I'm saying in the next 3 years, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has to make his cabinet work. We have to see economic growth. We have to see more jobs. We have to see greater income in the hands of people. And for business to invest, we must cut down regulations. We must remove unnecessary barriers to growth. And also, I think, Rahul, my last point is, along with some change in ministers in, say, health, they must change the bureaucrats. In any ministry where bureaucrats who have come in recently, who've been there for the last 2 or 3 years, have not done well, there must be a ruthless chopping. For example, the second wave was obviously a failure of the health department and the bureaucracy to understand that it will come and prepare for it and take the steps and advise the political leaders that this is what...
Let Amit Malviya respond to that important point, that if Dr. Harshvardhan had to go for not being able to rise up to the pandemic challenge, why should there not be a similar culling of bureaucrats as well? Why should they not also have to take responsibility, Mr. Malviya?
Well, Rahul, I want to make 2 quick points. One on the hypocrisy of caste and social representation, which I heard Rajdeep speak very eloquently about. I remember all your election analysis are about caste representation and so on and so forth. Then you come on television to discuss cabinet reshuffle and you say it doesn't make sense. Clearly something doesn't add up here. Secondly, when you have 5 ministers come from Northeast, you obviously tell the people that you're important and this government is focused on you. When you pick up people who come from marginalized communities, you tell the communities that this government cares for you. Not necessarily because you come from a community, but because you have faced marginalization over several years and we are going to make it good. That is the messaging that is important. We are in politics. I mean, we can't forget that fact.
Mr. Malviya, sorry. I'm not,
Hold on.
Mr. Malviya, I'm not at odds with you. No, just a minute, sir.
Rajiv, hold on.
Sir, just a small thing.
Wait for your turn.
I'm not at odds with you.
Wait for your turn.
I am saying that the political signaling in a cabinet is important. No one's doubting that. All I'm saying is I thought this was about a post-pandemic fix, not a political fix. That's all.
I thought we can't have a debate like this.
Sorry, please go ahead. My apologies.
You can't have Rajdeep speaking over me.
My apologies.
I don't approve of this.
Okay.
Go on, Amit.
He can speak on his turn, but he can't speak over me.
Go on, Mr. Malviya.
Thank you. So clearly, when you put a governance architecture in place, these are important levers of that governance architecture. Let's not forget that governance and government are not devoid from the society that it intends to serve. That's the point that I'm making. Secondly, on your point on the COVID pandemic and how it was managed and how accountable is the bureaucracy. First of all, health is a state subject. State governments are responsible for the lack of preparation. Today, Kerala is the worst affected state. It is not a BJP-run government. You have 15,000 cases daily coming out of Kerala. Maharashtra is not a BJP-ruled state. It is run by this Maha Vikas Aghadi, whatever that means. And the NCP runs the health department. That are the questions that you need to ask. But if you want to be blinded by politics, you can target Harshvardhan, who held the ministry in very crucial times. And lastly, some ministers who were asked to step down haven't necessarily been asked because their performance wasn't good. It's also perhaps to give opportunity to other people, ensure that you have representation from regions and from communities who have not been represented. And there's only so much that you can take in at a moment. And lastly, this whole idea about maximum governance, right? And a small government has nothing to do with the cabinet size. Please understand, it is about taking government out of your lives. And Mr. Modi's government has brought in several reforms that have cut the red tapeism, the bureaucracy, and made life easier for people. Whether it is your living index, whether it is your ease of doing business, all of it have shot up under Mr. Modi's administration. Corruption has gone down. Today, do you hear about any corruption at any level at the top echelons of the government? The answer is no. Why? Because the government is being run efficiently.
Let Sushmita Dev respond to it, that this is a government less corrupt than yours, that there haven't been major charges or there hasn't been anyone caught with his hand in the till in the manner that used to happen on the UPA watch year after year. Sushmita Dev.
You know, Rahul, I heard Amit Malviya ji saying that minimum government means less interference from the government and the Modi government is out of your lives. This is a government which tells its ministers what to tweet. This is a government which tells people what clothes to wear. This is a government that tells people how many children they can have. This is a government which tells you which religion is good and which religion is bad. This is a government who's constantly interfering with freedom of the press. So this government is definitely not about minimum government, it's about maximum interference. Secondly, if you're talking about accountability, then if one has to say if Harshvardhan went for failing to manage the pandemic well as the health minister, given the state of the economy, the finance minister should have gone. If we are worried about national security and integrity of our territory, then the defense minister should have also been changed. I think apart from the caste equation which Rajdeep is talking about, which is a political reality, I think what has also happened is a tacit preparation for the next set of elections in 22. And
which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. Ms. Dev, the fact is that the Congress also needs to reshuffle its deck. You haven't been able to take those decisions. Keeping an eye on the polls isn't a bad thing. For example, will Mr. Gandhi come back as
Rahul,
president? How long will Sonia Gandhi stay on for?
Yes. Let me finish.
Yes.
You don't have to argue for BJP. Let me just say my point.
I'm asking a question. I'm wondering when the Congress reshuffle will happen.
Is this debate about that? It's not. So don't distract me. Now, what I'm trying to say is that if you're looking at the caste equation that's being balanced, the social engineering, this has also to do with preparation with the next election, is not definitely strictly speaking about accountability, because the defense minister should have been sacked and the finance minister should have been sacked given the state of the economy. Now, coming back to this, This whole rhetoric about Modi government's this action plan and that action plan, I'm sorry to say, the economy was in shambles before the pandemic hit us. It was 45 years and we haven't had the kind of unemployment we've had. Now the question is, what is this new cabinet going to do? We'll have to wait and see, but they will have to change their style of functioning. And one more thing, this government has gone wrong is not taking on board expertise. And the biggest evidence of that is the pandemic. The Supreme Court had to do what the government should have done by setting
As
up
the Prime Minister junked that idea, Yogendra Yadav, in your view, that he tried to bring in lateral entrance, it didn't make quite the impact that he wanted, so he's now moved to the Ashwini Vaishnav model. You bring in somebody, make him an MP, let him cut his teeth in the political system, then give him an opportunity. He's an extremely bright person, been private secretary to Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee during the first NDA regime. He's studied abroad, he's an IAS officer, and is known by virtually everyone who's worked around him as being really sharp. Do you see some bright sparks there?
I'm sure he's sharp, I'm sure he's intelligent, I'm sure he's probably also honest. But in an expansion of this kind, let's not go by one or two showpieces. We are looking at one of the largest expansions ever of the Union Cabinet in the history of this country. So I would not be distracted by the spin doctors, by one or two cases. Let's see how they perform. But I must say that I actually for once agree with Amit Malviya, and this is such an unusual occasion that I must underline it. I completely agree with Amit Malviya that the size of the cabinet does not reflect whether it is bigger governance or smaller governance. I also agree with him that BJP is about taking government out of the life of the people. That's his words, not mine. I agree with him. It is about taking government out of the food security needs of the people. It is about taking government out of the need for public health of the people. It is about taking government out of the educational needs of the poor people. And I think this expansion has done nothing, I completely agree with him, has done nothing in this drive of taking government out of people's life. The only place where Amit Malviya and I might disagree is, sir, you do not live in US of A, you live in India. In India, people do not want government out of their life. They want government in their life on food, on education, on health.
Okay,
and this
let
is
Amit Malviya respond to that sharp riposte. Mr. Malviya.
Well, there's nothing sharp about it. This is ideological differences. The fact is that Yogendra Yadav and his ilk represent a worldview where they think that the government should be delivering everything. This government believes that the government, private participation, both have a role in delivering governance, healthcare and education, and our government has done so in full measure. Our government, and including the Prime Minister, has said that private sector is not a bad word. We need to involve everybody because we are such a large country, a country of 130 crore people, which needs to educate at any point in time about 15-20 crore people, can't just take the onus on itself. So the government, while it increases public funding, it increases the expenditure layout in education, health, we don't shy and run away from private sector participation. It's an idea that will always elude people like Yogendra Yadav because they come from a worldview which is all about public finances and the state doing everything. We believe in entrepreneurship, we believe in empowerment, we believe in society's participation. It's a very different economic model and an ideological perspective. And these ideological battles are fought in the election arena, and we won comprehensively twice.
There, Yogendra Yadav, Amit Malviya can argue that your idea has been rejected.
Rahul.
Yeah, go on.
Rahul, one last point. Problem is that the idea that people like Yogendra Yadav espouse is now limited to JNU campus, and that to 2 faculties of JNU campus and 1.5 faculty of Jadavpur University. Nothing beyond that. And they can't even win elections in these universities. Now forget about winning India or for that matter running state governments or central governments.
Quick final words, Yogendra Yadav. I'm running out of time, sir.
I spoke about health, I spoke about education, I spoke about food. I want some responsible leader from BJP, not their casual spokespersons, to come and say on national television that they want to take government out of people's life on health, education, and food, then I'll respond seriously. About winning elections, by that logic, I think what Indira Gandhi did in 1975 was perfectly all right, because she had won such a big mandate. And then she went on to win 1980 as well. So why complain about Congress? Congress used to win elections. They must have been beautiful. They must have been very nice. They must have been great.
Rajdeep, is the Prime Minister fortuitous with the timing, in the sense that the pandemic is hopefully now wearing off? People are increasingly getting vaccinated. So there will be a bounce back from where we are. And therefore, in what happens over the next few weeks and months, the government will look better than it did because of the virtual lockdown on account of the pandemic.
Look, we don't know what will happen next in the pandemic. Let's be very clear. If there is a bounce back, great. And the government will be able to carry that impetus of a bounce back into the election. The point I was making earlier, which seemed to get lost in translation, was that to treat a cabinet expansion only as a political fix is the old way of looking at cabinet reshuffles. But the most popular minister in terms of the applause he got when Mr. Modi was Modi's cabinet in 2019 was Pratap Sarangi, who was quietly removed yesterday. Then it was seen, a person who's come in from the grassroots, and they don't necessarily make effective ministers. You may be, as Yogendra Yadav said, to reach out to a marginalized community or the Matuas. You may, John Barla is from an area where the BJP is growing in Bengal. You can do those. It can be a temporary political fix. The entire cabinet reshuffle is not a political fix. To my mind, the challenge is governance. And the governance challenge is what the focus over the next couple of years should be. Mr. Modi is going to win the next election in 2024 if he gets governance right in terms of the economy, not by appointing, ensuring that the caste combination is perfect. He's winning elections on his own steam. Okay, that's my point. So cabinets have to be about governance fixes, Rahul, less about political fixes is the point I was making. I don't think Mr. Amit Malviya would disagree with that.
Ultimately, people will judge whether their lives have changed for the better or not, and the government has about 2+ years to try and ensure that people can feel that last mile delivery, which they did in 2019 over the last 5 years. Will they feel it again? That is the critical question. There are challenges, and we will track the work of this team very closely. For the time being, Amit Malviya, Sushmita Deb, Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, Mohandas Pai and Yogendra Yadav, thank you for joining us. Rajdeep, all the best for your show. He needs to quickly go get ready. Thank you. Slipping into a break. When we come back, no stopping COVID yet, says the third wave threat looms. Hundreds of